Today is Friday, June 26th, 2020. I'm Jake Morphonios with today's Blackstone Intelligence Report. This past Tuesday, Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy signed an authorization that activated the National Guard forces in the nation's capital. The purpose of the order is to protect national monuments and critical infrastructure in D.C. from the ongoing vandalism by Black Lives Matter rioters. The request for the National Guard order actually originated from David Benhart, who was President Trump's Secretary of the Interior. In recent weeks, the United States has fallen into a quagmire of violence, looting, vandalism, all of this following the killing of Minneapolis resident George Floyd by the local police. Currently, 100 troops are stationed in the Washington, D.C. area with the potential to call up an additional 300 more personnel. The National Guard troops weren't needed on Wednesday as local law enforcement moved down 16th Street toward the White House as they cleared out all of the tents that belonged to the Black Lives Matter demonstrators. Earlier this month, the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, established a two-block zone along 16th Street, which is just a few hundred yards from the White House, and named it Black Lives Matter Plaza. The mayor had a Black Lives Matter Plaza sign posted and also ordered the Department of Public Works to paint the phrase Black Lives Matter in gigantic 35-foot-tall yellow letters down the street. The group, Black Lives Matter DC, actually criticized the mayor's actions, saying that they were, quote, a distraction from real policy changes. And they then went out and added to the mayor's mural by adding their own 35-foot-tall message to the street that reads, defund the police. The Black Lives Matter mural in Washington, D.C. is by no means unique. We see similar murals that have been emblazoned on streets in dozens of cities across the country. While I've been clear on my support for major law enforcement and justice system reforms to help communities of color in America, I just can't give my support to Black Lives Matter as an organization, and neither should you. Next to Zionism, the most subversive influence in America is the Marxist movement. Truth be told, there's actually very little difference between Zionism and Marxism. They're really just two sides of the same totalitarian coin. So, it is important for Americans to understand the danger of promoting Black Lives Matter as an organization, because the group's purpose stretches far beyond simply seeking racial justice, which is what most of us assume the group is all about, right? The truth is actually much darker than that. The organization envisions the complete destruction of America as we know it, the destruction of the American way of life as we know it, right down to the removal of some of our most basic freedoms. In other words, Black Lives Matter seeks to impose a system of Marxism on the entire country. Now, if that sounds shocking to you, just keep listening, because I'm going to show you this. I'm going to prove it to you. To keep this video short, I'm only going to highlight just one of BLM's main goals, which is the destruction of the traditional family unit. Black Lives Matter was founded back in 2013 by three black community organizers. There is Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi. These women are formally trained Marxist activists. Don't take my word for it. Here is Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Her full quote was actually this, quote, "The first thing, I think, is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories, and I think that what we really tried to do is build a movement that could be utilized by many, many black folk." So right there, we can establish that BLM's purpose was, it was created by Marxist activists, right? for the purpose of spreading this ideology to many, many other people. So let's go and read directly from the official Black Lives Matter website to find out what this ideology is. If you go to the site's page that's entitled What We Believe, nearly half of the page is dedicated not to racial justice for blacks, but to promoting the core Marxist principle of destroying the traditional family unit. Let me read an excerpt from their website. Quote, "We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift black trans folk, especially black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. We build a space that affirms black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their contexts. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. We foster a queer-affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual." Okay, let me review part of this. The official Black Lives Matter statement of belief says that the organization and its comrades are working to, quote, disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. Now, what does that mean? The nuclear family structure is a father, a mother, and their children. A mom, a dad, and the kids. That is the nuclear family structure. Black Lives Matter clearly states on their website that their goal is to disrupt that traditional family structure. Now, this is classic Marxist ideology. Communist leaders have long acknowledged that much of America's strength as a nation comes from the strength of these traditional family units, because a strong family is the most fundamental building block of this country. The family unit is the foundation of America. So, Marxism knows that to destroy the United States, or Western civilization in general, you have to start by weakening the foundation that it's built on, which is this nuclear family unit. I want to point out as well that the Black Lives Matter position is to weaken the family unit by creating an alternative to it. The way they worded it is, quote, villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children. And again, this is classic Marxism, to replace the traditional family with an alternative form of so-called family. Now, I'm going to establish this fact by turning to the writings of Karl Marx himself. Marx, who was a non-religious Jew from Prussia, he teamed up with comrade Friedrich Engels to publish their infamous Communist Manifesto in 1848. The basic premise of the Communist Manifesto is that the greatest evil in the world is the struggle between classes in society. According to Marxist theory, those who control the means of production are called the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie owns the factories, the workshops, the mills, and the land. They are the ones who own shares in companies. They are the ones who can take out loans from banks. And ultimately, they are the ones who reap higher profits from the production. Then you've got the other class, which is the proletariat. The proletariat are the workers who do most of the labor in the mills and the factories and the workshops. But because they don't have the control over the production, like the bourgeois class, their profits are limited. And so you have a class distinction. And Marxists say that this class distinction is evil. All people should receive the same income, regardless of who they are or what their contributions are. Marxist theory, therefore, proposes the complete abolition of private property. And Marx writes about this in the manifesto. He says this, quote, "The theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property." And he also writes this, "And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so." See, Marx's position is that the ownership of private property enables this bourgeoisie to earn more money than the proletariat. Therefore, what you have to do is remove from that middle class their right to own property. You have to bring them down to the same level as the proletariat. So what is going to replace this? Who will take care of the property? Who will own the property or the means of production, if not the individuals who make up the middle class? Well, the answer, according to the Marxists, is the all-powerful state. But if you think this through logically, you cannot take the power away from individuals. You can't take property rights away from individuals without taking away their freedom, can you? Well, this fact is actually acknowledged by Marx in the manifesto. He wrote this, quote, "You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at." But Karl Marx and the Marxist philosophy goes far beyond simply destroying a person's right to own private property. Anything that contributes to this evil of property ownership also has to be destroyed, and that includes destroying the traditional family unit. Now, if you stop and think about that for a second, and it doesn't quite make sense to you how the traditional family unit has anything to do with the rest of this, congratulations, you are not yet thinking like a Marxist. So let me fill this in for you. From the Marxist point of view, the stable family unit, which consists of a father, a mother, and their children, is in itself a means of perpetuating the evil bourgeoisie class. And the reasoning is that parents bequeath their property to their children from generation to generation, which allows the gradual accumulation of property and the perpetuation of the bourgeoisie. Therefore, you have to destroy the traditional family. There can be no loyalty to family. Not from children to parents or parents to children. Children are to be wards of the communist state. They are to be taught by the state and the society that the state creates, not by the children's own parents. Let me read again from Marx's Communist Manifesto, quote, "Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish, as a matter of course, when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital." Now, if you're wondering why Karl Marx is mentioning prostitution in the middle of this, it's because a bit later in the manifesto, he goes on to talk about how under communism, women are essentially property of the state. They can be doled out for sexual satisfaction or reproduction purposes, however the state deems appropriate. They essentially become prostitutes of the state, or as Marx words it, a community of women. But we can save that can of worms for another time. So let's continue on. Marx then writes about how it is criminal for parents to raise their own children and teach their values to their own kids, rather than the children being separated and being given an education by the communist society, or in other words, by the communist state. Here's what Marx writes, quote, "Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social education. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class," which means the parents. Marx writes, "The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parents and child, becomes all the more disgusting, the more by the action of modern industry." So, now that I have taken straight out of the Communist Manifesto the information that establishes that the destruction of the traditional family unit is a core tenet of Marxist philosophy, let's go back again and read from the Black Lives Matter website. Let's look at their statement of belief. Quote, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children." Okay, for those of you out there who care about racial justice for the black community, I am one of you. But law enforcement and justice reform does not have anything to do with taking away the rights of America's parents to raise their own children. Justice for George Floyd and other victims of police brutality has nothing to do with disrupting this so-called Western prescribed nuclear family structure, or to turn the care of our children over to some supposedly enlightened society. So if you support the Black Lives Matter organization, you are in fact supporting its agenda. And that agenda is nothing short of the imposition of Marxism in America. Society has to give Black Lives Matter what they want, right? Or they will burn America down.
For any American to accuse us of being violent, it's extremely hypocritical. We're talking about self-defense. We're talking about 4 or 5 police officers choking someone to death and someone from the community having the training to intervene effectively. When black people start talking about arming themselves and defending themselves, the talk is violence. If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it. All right, and I could be speaking figuratively. Okay. I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation. For any American to accuse us of being violent, it's extremely hypocritical. If this country doesn't give us what we want, burn, give us what we want, burn.
And like all the Marxists before them, the Black Lives Matter organization is willing to burn down the existing societal order to achieve, through violence and mayhem, the communist utopia that they envision. Just look at what's going on in Chaz. I cannot support that. I will not support that. And I invite you to join me in standing against this dangerous push to normalize Marxist ideology in America. It will be our undoing as a nation. Black Lives Matter is not tearing down monuments all across the country because this is somehow a way to stop racism. The destruction of a nation's monuments to our nation's founders, this is a classic Marxist tactic that has been used time and time again in other countries. You first turn a people against their own country's history and culture, then against their own country's system of law, because you have to hate your own system before you're going to see the light and understand that you need to bring in a new system. If we are made to see Thomas Jefferson as an evil, racist white man, someone who should be shunned, someone whose monuments should be torn down because he was a slave owner, well, logically, so should Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence be shunned. Our U.S. Constitution, which originally allowed for slavery, becomes a document of pure racist evil, something we can't tolerate. You have to get rid of the Constitution. It's racist. So when we turn our backs as a nation on not just the bad parts of our history, but on all of our history, we lose that which binds us together and gives us a national identity. And the destruction of that identity is exactly what the Marxist Black Lives Matter organization is seeking to do. Just listen to what they say in their interviews, their leaders. This is what they're saying. Recognize their rhetoric for what it is. It is Marxist propaganda. So at the risk of being labeled a racist for condemning BLM as an organization, I will continue to speak out against the group, while at the same time inviting my fellow Americans to join with me in calling for substantive reforms that will help to protect the rights of all Americans, including Black Americans who have been persecuted. So thank you all for watching. Now please, go out and share this video with your friends. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morfonios.
If you appreciate hard-hitting investigative journalism that you won't get from the mainstream media, then please support Jake's research and analysis at patreon.com/endtimesnewsreport, paypal.me/endtimesnewsreport, or send a check or money order to Jake Morfonios, P.O. Box 1333, Kernersville, North Carolina 27285.
Blackstone face masks are high quality. Each reusable mask is handmade by my wife using a double layer of 100% cotton. Inside the mask are 2 layers of a filtration material called non-woven interfacing that significantly reduces particles from passing through the mask. To ensure a proper fit, each mask uses 4 double-stitched ties instead of cheap elastic bands that often break. The masks also have an inner plastic-coated wire over the nose bridge and cheekbones to mold the mask to your face. That reduces the chance of particles from slipping in through loose gaps along the edges. We have 18 styles to choose from. To browse our selection, visit blackstoneintel.com and click on the store button. Our family is using a portion of the sales proceeds to purchase materials to donate as many free masks as we can to hospitals through a program sponsored by Joanne Fabric. The goal is to reach 100 million masks. So you can feel good knowing that your purchase not only helps protect your family while supporting mine, but you're also contributing to help our nation's healthcare workers. So visit blackstoneintel.com and buy a mask for each member of your family today.